Hello and welcome everybody, and thank you for joining us today for this webinar. My name is Darren Britton and I am the National Assistive Technology Project Officer at the Australian Disability Clearinghouse on Education and Training, that is ADCET for short. My pronouns are he, him, and I'm a white male in my mid-50s, still mid-50s, with greying blonde hair and a beard, and I'm wearing a blue checked collared shirt today and blue rimmed glasses. Okay, this webinar is being live captioned, and to activate the captions today, click on the CC button in the toolbar within Zoom, which is located either at the top or the bottom of your screen. We also have captions available via a browser, which will now be added into the chat box if you prefer to read along that way. ADCET is hosted on Lutruwita, which is Tasmanian Aboriginal land, and in the spirit of reconciliation, ADCET respectfully acknowledges the Lutruwita nations and also recognises the Aboriginal history and culture of the land. And I pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging, and to the many Aboriginal people that did not make elder status. I also acknowledge all other countries and lands from participants in this webinar, and also like to acknowledge their elders and ancestors and their legacy to us and any Aboriginal in Australia and Torres Strait Islanders people joining us today for this webinar. Speaking of which, today's webinar, What We're Learning, Empowering Disability Services in Australian Higher Education, will provide an update on Darlene McLennan's ACSES Equity Fellowship, which examines disability support in Australian universities. This webinar will explore what disability support looks like across institutions, practitioner experiences and capacity, and what students are saying, which matters most. Before we begin, just a few housekeeping details. This webinar is being live captioned from Sharon from Captify Live and will be recorded, the recording of which will be made available on the ADCET site in the coming days. Today's presentation will run for around 45 to 50 minutes or so. Then at the end, there'll be 10 or so minutes for your questions. Throughout the presentation, please feel free to use the chat box with us and with each other, but please remember to choose everyone so that we can all hear what you have to say. Darlene is happy to answer any questions at the end. So if you have a question that you'd like asked, please use the Q&A box rather than the chat box so that we can consolidate those in one place. Also, feel free to use the reactions button within Teams for emojis during this presentation, as it's a great way to let us and Darlene know that you're out there, as it can feel very isolating when delivering a webinar without seeing the audience that you're presenting to. With all of that out of the way, I'll now hand over to you, Darlene, for details on what we're learning, empowering disability services in Australian higher education.
Hi, thanks, Darren, for that. That's fabulous. It seems so weird to be on this side of the on the camera, not being the one introducing, but being the one presenting. And I must admit, I'm a wee little bit nervous. I'm not even going to look at the numbers that are have joined us. But thank you to those who have joined. First, I just want to acknowledge that, and I'm using the University of Tasmanian's acknowledgement, acknowledging the Pakana, I'm so nervous, and the Palawa people of Lutruwita, the traditional owners on the land upon which we live and work. And I want to pay respect to elders past and present as the knowledge holders and sharers. We honour their strong culture and knowledges as vital to self-determination, well-being and resilience of their community. We stand for a future that profoundly respects and acknowledges Aboriginal perspectives, culture, language and history. And on the screen, there is an image of a fire burning in a large bowl, which is reflects, welcome ceremonies, etc. So it's a very wonderful symbol. So thanks, Jane. Okay, I've asked Jane to turn off the slides because I'm just wanting to, I suppose, introduce myself to those who don't know me and share a little bit about the last 14 months for me. So as Darren said, my name is Darlene McLennan. My pronouns are she, her. I am a woman with grey-brown hair with glasses. I'm wearing a black shirt today and I'm probably, well, this is my 59th year. I'll turn 60 at the end of the year, which is, I must admit, quite daunting, but I wouldn't want it any other way. So for those who may have registered for the webinar, probably in August, I was going to present what we were learning at that point. But at that time, tragedy struck for me. My mother became unwell and after a very short illness died. I was very lucky that I actually had long service leave, so I was able to take 2 months leave, which enabled me to extend this fellowship for 2 months. So hence, it'll finish at the end of April instead of the end of February. So that's given me some time to collect my thoughts and to start again. I want to thank everybody for their support through that time, especially my team, the ADCET team and the research team, because it's made for difficult because my research assistant had planned their life around the research and the timelines, and so things haven't always gone to plan. I also just wanted to talk a little bit of my lived experience. I have an adult diagnosis of ADHD and learning disability of dyspraxia. And in this research, I reflected why this research was important to me. I've always been passionate around people with disability and have worked in the disability sector for 40 plus years. But when I came to the tertiary sector, probably 21, going on 21 years ago in May, it was, I suppose, hit home about the challenges and struggles that I had accessing education, especially further education. And it's only in the last couple of years that I've actually been comfortable enough to say that I actually never succeeded in an undergraduate degree. I had probably 3 attempts of doing a Bachelor of Arts and a social science degree, but I never got through because I really struggled with what I felt was this secret language. I could never understand academia and the way it's writing. I was very fortunate that the university put on a postgrad qualification around business on the Northwest Coast, and I started that education where it was more applied learning. I even passed a finance unit, which I thought I'd never be able to do, but it was that we ran a factory and we made widgets, and that real hands-on experience enabled me to kind of unpack and to succeed in that study. And then I was also able to undertake a grad cert in careers education, once again, that applied learning. So it really made me reflect of the challenges that many students have, especially those with a learning disability in language and writing. And yeah, so that kind of put me in good stead. But then it's also thrown up a huge challenge for me undertaking a research fellowship. But anyway, we'll hear more about that now. So thanks, Jane. Okay, just waiting. There we go. So on this screen, we've got the title of the research, which was What We're Learning, Empowering Disability Services in Australia Higher Education. On this image is 3 people sitting around a table in a campus library. It's actually the library in Launceston, which is fabulous. And the students have laptops and one person is in a wheelchair. We also have the University of Tasmania logo, Access and the Curtin logos. So as stated, I'm an ACSES fellow, and this project or this fellowship has been supported by a whole heap of people. So I want to personally thank Evie Gannon, who's been my research assistant throughout this with the stops and starts, which is fabulous. Merrin McCracken, who many of you may know, who was a previous manager at Deakin University, and David Swain, who was an NDCO. So those 3 people have held me in strong stead throughout this project. And then also I have all the other people, the wind beneath my wings that support me. Jane from ADCET, who's kind of done a lot of some of the admin work for me, the whole ADCET team, and my advisory committee. And I'm not going to go through all those. They will be a part of the research report, but I have an amazing advisory committee with some great students and people with lived experience, people doing the work. It's just been absolutely empowering to have such a group behind me. I also want to take the opportunity to thank everybody who's taken the surveys, who have been interviewed, and have been happy to meet with me. I've had some amazing conversations in the last 13 months, absolutely amazing. And also just want to also thank Rebecca Morris, who has managed ADCET while I've been away so well. I feel that it has been in good hands. And it's been great meeting with the team just before this presentation and saying, I'm coming back, which they said is good and bad. I take that. I understand that. Okay, and I also just want to thank the Australian Centre for Student Equity and Success Access, the acronym Access, who have enabled this fellowship to happen. Next slide. So this fellowship, and on this slide is an image of photograph of students sitting in a row at a desk engaged in writing and using laptops and tablets. And that kind of talks about the fellowship has examined how disability services in Australian universities can better support students with disability, especially as demand grows. What the fellowship aims is to understand what the sector needs, and it aims to drive real systemic change. What we learn will shape the next phase of the work, including development of practical tools for benchmarking and self-assessment and creating educational opportunities for disability practitioners. It was really difficult to define what I was going to research. Anybody I spoke to when they saw what I was trying to do kind of laughed and said, I'm trying to do too much. Naively going into this, I thought, oh, that's not a lot. And then I've learnt the hard way that it is a lot. But I'm getting quite excited about hopefully what we're calling those practical tools that we'll get to develop from this research as the next phase, and what they'll do and how they can impact on the sector as a whole. Next slide. So why is it important? So it I haven't even got the year now, but the current Labor government undertook the Accord, the Universities Accord, and through that, it had given a commitment to improve access for equity cohorts, including those with disabilities, access to further education. And from the Jobs and Skills report, the Australian workforce, it says that 90% of the roles in the next 10 years will require a post-secondary qualification. And the reality is we have to ensure that people with disabilities are not left behind in that. We have to ensure that access is really, available to them and that they can succeed in their qualifications. And from the sector, we know that the numbers are increasing. So 98,000 of domestic undergraduates identified in 2024 with a disability. That's 13.5% of all undergraduates. That's a significant number. The number has doubled since 2012. And the rates do vary across universities. Some universities reporting, or the student numbers are reported at 5%, and the highest is 23%. I think Kylie will have put in the link to the report that ACSES has undertaken around the data set on disability. I encourage you all to read that. It's really affirms around, the busyness of your work and how hard people with the disability practitioners are working because of those increased numbers. Next slide, please. There's also drivers of change beyond the Accord, like the Accord was one. But in recent times, we also had the Royal Commission into Violence, Abuse, Exploitation of People with Disability. There wasn't overly a lot that probably impacted on the university sector, but there was certainly a lot of evidence in that report around the experience of people with disability, especially around discrimination and probably what we'd call ableism. So I think that can help inform the sector on what we do. There's been a recent autism strategy, which has been fabulous. As I said, the University Accord. Currently the government is reviewing the Disability Discrimination Act. We're getting excited that hopefully that will include a positive obligation for providers. That's what many advocates are fighting for. We've also, and hopefully people are aware of this, there was a consultation from the Higher Education Standards panel around the framework, and there were questions around disability, which was absolutely fabulous. And I can thank my fabulous colleague Paul Harper for fighting, who sits on the panel, but for fighting for those questions to be there. ADCET has put in a submission, so hopefully I didn't actually provide Kylie with the link for that, but yeah, hopefully those submissions will be made public soon and people can read what people have said. I put in my own submission and I certainly highlighted the importance of disability services within universities and how they're perceived. And if we kind of, hold them in higher esteem, I think people with lived experience of disability will have a better experience within their universities. We've also had an increase in funding, which is absolutely fabulous. The Disability Support Fund, the National Priorities Pool, and the Capacity Building Fund. So I'll talk a little bit about those in a minute. We also have a Higher Education Disability Roundtable, which the Australian Tertiary Education Commission facilitate, which have a number of people with lived experience and peak bodies on to help inform around some of the policy decisions that are being made within government at the moment. We also have a student support policy, which all the universities are now having to uptake, and the department are looking at ways to ensure that disability is included in that, and ensure that students are not that are struggling, that there's strategies in place to ensure students succeed. So if you haven't read your institution's student support policy, I encourage you to, because they are all meant to be live on universities' websites. Going back to the funding, and hopefully most of you will know that there was a quadrupling of the Disability Support Fund from 13 million to 53 million in 2025. That's having a huge impact and probably needs a whole research project on the impact of the DSF and what it's doing. Many universities are using it to increase services, to support innovative services, and also to ensure universal design for learning is embedded in the institutions. So that's quite exciting to see. ADCET also received funding through the National Priorities Pool program in 2025 to support additional activities and develop a sustainability plan for a collaborative model to support the work of ADCET. And then the Capacity Building Fund was provided to ACSES to translate its strength in strategic engagement, trialling and evaluating initiatives, and translating research from all identified equity cohorts to higher education, with an additional focus on disability initiatives. And in the next 6 months, you'll hear more about what has been achieved through that program. Next slide, Jane. There's also a new oversight and accountability that has come into place. So the Australian Tertiary Education Commission, you heard me say ATEC before, that's going to be an independent body to oversee the sector. It's currently in an interim stage. And the legislation is before Parliament, going through Parliament. And then there is also the National Student Ombudsman Office, which we're seeing significant changes within culture within universities. A number of people have reported that universities are taking it quite seriously and improving their complaint system through this process. There is a publication, the annual report from the NSO office around the complaints that they received in 24-25. Kylie's going to put the link into that. And if you can search, I couldn't quite get the link directly to the publication itself, but if you search for the 2024-2025 publication, you will get to see the report, annual report. But what it says is that the 12% of students who contacted the NSO identified as a person with disability and or had accessibility requirements, and just under 5% of all complaints received related to a disability discrimination issue. So 41 complaints were received. There was inadequate support, 15 complaints, disability learning access plans issues, 28 complaints. So students also spoke that the providers not accepting their medical documentation in support of their adjustments, not putting in special complaints, the complaint and appeal procedures were a challenge. Some students discussed inconsistency in what documentations was needed and the lack of clarity from the provider as to why these documents were considered unsuitable. So yeah, it's quite amazing, and it probably from this research, it's probably what we heard from students as well. So I encourage you to read that report. Okay, so next slide, please, Jane. So the the challenge for me is when I decided on what to do. Um, there's 100 things that I could have researched or looked at within this fellowship, and there's been a lot of things that have come about in the last, decades of service. one of the challenge I find is sometimes, especially middle managers come into this sector and think, well, why isn't it done this way? Or why do you do it this way? Or what evidence is there is that this is the best way? And it's hard because it's something like it's how we've always done it. You know, disability practitioner, the sector has a strong history of supporting one another, to building our capacity together. For those who aren't a practitioner, we have what's called a listserv, an Ofsted listserv, where questions around, some of the challenges that a practitioner may have around an inherent requirement of a course with somebody with their disability. What do other people do? So there's kind of what we'd call moderating within that listserv. We also have ADCET and we also have Attend that have supported the practice. But we have kind of morphed out of this probably maybe informally, but we're also not alone. The USA, Ireland, the UK, all similar, don't have a kind of formal or professional structure. So it's just how it is. But what I'm proposing through this fellowship is maybe some more structure to how it is so that we also have more evidence, I suppose, of why it is good practice and what we do. Because what we're seeing when the practice is good, it can impact positively on students with disability. So throughout history, we have had people, fabulous people that have come from the sector that have done some great work. The first one is Students with Disability, a Code of Practice for Australian Tertiary Institutions. That was written in 1998 by Barry O'Connor, Des Power, Rhonda Watson and Judy Hartley. Both giants, all four giants within the sector many, many moons ago. And it was absolutely fabulous at the last Pathways in Brisbane. Barry O'Connor was there and was taking photos. So it was lovely to see him and what he, so many years after he'd left the sector. So Kylie's putting in these things in to the chat as we go, but that code of practice doesn't necessarily, people may not necessarily know about that code of practice. So these kind of things are there, but have kind of got lost in time. The biggest influence to me was a paper that was written by the fabulous Trevor Allen, who, many will know, passed away a couple of years ago. Trevor, at the Pathways Conference in 2002, proposed a paper called Professionalising Disability Services in Tertiary Education. It's a very powerful paper, and that's also going in the link. And it was quite disheartening reading Trevor's paper and thinking maybe things really haven't changed since 2002, but that's probably what pushed me to actually do this fellowship. So Trevor made a case that the sector needed a professional association, a code of ethics, a code of practice, clear minimum standards for staffing and resourcing, and a structured accreditation pathway so practitioners could build a genuine career. He was concerned that without these things, universities could continue to view disability services as a generalist administrative function, something that could be filled by anybody at the lowest possible cost. He worried, rightly, about skilled people burning out and leaving, about wild disparities in resourcing across institutions, and about a workforce that was highly capable but had no formal way to demonstrating that it is to demonstrating that to make the people making decisions about their budget and status. And this has happened over since 2002, that many universities have changed. Most of us know that disability practitioners, we would hope, would be at a higher education level of 7 and above, but we do hear of some universities that put them at 5 or 6. So, but we haven't been able to demonstrate why we need the level of professionalism that is required for the sector, and I hope this fellowship will help inform that. The commitment and the progress has come about because of hard people working in the sector. So, that's why we actually are in the good stead we are, but I don't know if we can actually kind of rest on our laurels without professionalising the sector. So that's, Trevor's work has really informed this fellowship. So please read the paper. It's really, quite amazing to hear that a lot hasn't changed. The other one I'm putting up is the university's, what was the Australian Vice-Chancellors Council, the guidelines relating to students with disability, which was produced in 2006. It no longer, so that's Universities Australia, they changed their name to Universities Australia. It's no longer in used by universities. ADCET continues to house it as an historical record. But I suppose it's just to say that in 2006, the governing body of universities were committed to students with disability and produced guidelines. There has been a couple of attempts in the last decade to kind of revisit those and get them done again, but maybe that will be one of the recommendations that are made by this fellowship. And then we also have the Attend Members Professional Standards of Practice and Code of Ethics, and that was developed in 2013 by, once again, a committed members of Attend to undertake those standards and code of ethics. And if you are a member of Attend, you actually sign and say you're committed to those. So that's the sector kind of as it stands now. So with this research project, to collect the evidence and to understand what was happening currently in the sector. Sorry, Jane, the next slide. So we undertook a manager survey to kind of benchmark, I suppose, or do what I'm calling later the numbers game of where the sector is now as far as staffing numbers and etc. We did a student and practitioner survey. We did in-depth interviews, and we have also done some semi-structured interviews, especially with the kind of a couple of vice chancellors, chancellors, people that kind of government, people who inform policy. And we've also undertaken some in-depth interviews, which has probably been one of the most powerful things I think I've ever done in my career. The student stories and practitioner stories were very powerful and impacted on me greatly. And then we've also undertaken some workshops. So next slide. So the data and insights collected, we had well over 90% of the response from managers. And that was kind of, we collected data on service operations, leadership, effectiveness and practitioner staff, capacity and capabilities. We had 220 plus responses from students and practitioners on their experience and some questions around professional development. As I said, I undertook in-depth practitioner and student interviews. One of the positive things, it's terrible kind of putting this in light, but with my mother passing away and the program needing to be extended, I actually got to undertake all of the interviews just because, yeah, there was no, like the research, I didn't have a research assistant at the time. And it was a really powerful thing. One of the challenges for me, or probably one of the positive things about me, is if I hear stories, I probably go to trying to find solutions, which is not, I tried not to do that within the interviews because it's not what the interviews are about. But it really got my brain whirling about how do we solve some of the challenges that practitioners and students had. So it was lovely having those conversations. And I once again can't thank the students and practitioners enough for sharing their wisdom and their experience. Yeah, it's a game changer for me in understanding those, but also hopefully a game changer for the fellowship. We also had workshops and engagement, and we connected with 80 plus participants across several workshops and engagements. And as I said before, I have had an advisory committee that has supported me along the way. Next slide, please, Jane. Okay, I'm now going to show some of the quotes that were from the student data. We got a huge amount of quotes, and it was really hard to kind of choose what I was going to share within 50 minutes, a 50-minute presentation. So this just touches on the surface, but it's kind of, I've pulled out some of the key themes that the research will be focusing on. On this screen, there's an image of two young students sitting on an outside bench at a campus with laptops, and they look happy, which is fabulous. So next slide. I've shown the student quotes in a blue background with a light blue bubble, like speech bubble. Me being not very good at graphic design, etc., it was a bit of a challenge to try to work these out. But I'm going to kind of show, or well, kind of read out some of the quotes that we heard from students. One of the key themes was that documentation often burden falls hardest on those least able to carry it. So students consistently described a process that is exhausting, expensive, and poorly designed, particularly for those with conditions that affect executive functioning or students without access to affordable healthcare. So the two quotes that I pulled out, and I could have pulled out quite a lot, was the first quote: "The executive function of that is so hard. Like I need assistance and adaptations in actually getting those forms filled out." It was quite interesting. Somebody who was diagnosed with ADHD just found the struggle. She was taking her 6 months to organise her documentation required by her university, and she was really struggling to manage that with her disability. The other quote here is, "I have to get a specialist, my doctor, or a psychiatrist, or a psychologist to write down, fill out a complete document of everything I need for my university study by someone who has no idea of someone in a university needs or even is available." So that was, something else that people identified, that sometimes the medical person's going, well, I don't know what you need. Um, and look, here it's not saying that all universities do this. I know there are many practitioners we spoke to that work with the student on identifying the needs, and it's hard because some of these quotes are quite negative, and I'm not wanting to portray the disability practitioner sector in a negative light. It's just this is what some students experience in some universities, and what we want to try to solve through some of the things that we're recommending from this research so that the experience can be better for students. So it's been, yeah, it has been quite hard because I know the disability practitioners who are online, you work really hard, and I don't want this to be seen in a negative light for any of you. Just the next slide, Jane. I couldn't quite not have a couple more quotes for this. So one student says, "I have diabetes, and that's not a temporary thing. Like I've had it since I was 7. Please." Like she was actually required to get new documentation every semester. So she was having to front up to her doctor, but then she actually discovered there was this tick box on the form that probably would have meant that she didn't need to do that, but no one told her or a doctor that if they ticked that box, she wouldn't need to go back regularly. So she found that so frustrating. Then another person said, "In the city I'm studying, the wait lists are so incredibly long. You can be waiting years, and some people just can't afford it, so they just don't." So that was, yeah, one of the challenges that were presented. Next slide. And I am going through these very quickly because of time. Um, but yeah, hopefully, yeah, that it's okay to go so quickly. So students often don't know what support is available or what to ask for. Almost every student in the data made the point that they couldn't ask for what they didn't know existed. Yet many services defaulted to asking students to identify their own needs. And it was challenged because I think, we do have that ethos that the student knows themselves best, that we want to empower students. But some students said, like a practitioner would say, "Well, what do you need?" And like one student had gone to a school that was very small, was very well supported by her teachers, and she didn't quite understand what the university environment would be like or what was needed. So, so the quotes are, the first quote: "There's no parameters of what help is available. I have no idea what to ask. I've never done an exam, so I can't anticipate what I might struggle with until I'm already struggling with it." And another quote: "What can I ask for? What is the most I can get? What is the least I can get? What do people in my institution typically get? I had no idea." Next slide. The other challenge was that self-advocacy is quite a tiring thing for students. And once again, I know as a sector, we try to empower students. But many students reflected that they felt very stretched sometimes by having to continue arguing or to continue to fight for the services. Many of them spoke the reason they often do advocate for themselves is for other students, not themselves, that they want other students' experience to be better. So students are expected to chase academics, re-explain their needs, to follow up when adjustments are not implemented, even when there's technically the institution's legal responsibility. The two quotes here that I chose: having to send 4 emails every semester feels like an extra task that my peers don't have to do. And then I had an extension knocked back, but every appeal was found in my favour, but it was not a pleasant experience. I had to again provide details and justify my disability. Next slide, please, Jane. This one I named up as Computer Says No. And probably I know that Little Britain's probably not it's probably a bit on the nose now, but I just kind of felt that that encapsulated what was being said here. Student and practitioners alike noted that an academic can simply refuse an adjustment, and there is often nothing they can do about it. And the reasons academics may say no is varied. And once again, I'm not wanting to, speak negatively of academics, because I know their workload and expectations is immense. And I certainly don't want this to be a blaming game. But it was really what was coming up clearly, that computer says no. So the quotes here are, they essentially just say no. I don't think so. There is no mechanism at the university to make them follow it up. So that was kind of, they were answering like, is there anything you can do around following up? And another person said, one academic takes it upon themselves to decide which adjustments are needed and which ones are not. Well, you don't need that one, do you? So there they are, reading an access plan with the student and deciding what adjustments they can and can't have. Okay, Jane, the next slide. Being aware of the time, I'm going to have to go through these quite quickly. Experience varies enormously between institutions, between practitioners at the same institution. So students spoke about that, like one quote was, adjustments at one universities were called unrealistic at another. Or somebody also said someone will have the same condition, but one person will get 10 minutes because they only asked for 10 minutes, and the other will get 20 minutes because they asked for it. But shouldn't they be the same? Next slide. And then ableism at universities. So a lot of students communicated that they didn't see that they belonged. So the quote is, I think that they think they can either hack it at university, but it should be exclusive, and disabled people fall outside of that exclusivity. And the more accommodations they give, the less inclusive and less hard or rigorous the university becomes. And another quote from a student is, I was once told by a unit chair that you despise the disability support plans because you Gen Zers can't handle your anxiety because you didn't get your matcha latte this morning. Grow up and live in the real world. So yes, ableism is, is within the university too. Next slide, Jane. And as usual with presentations, I said to the team I hadn't timed this, and they said, you're not going to make it. And I said, oh, I'll make it. But I'm realizing that we are running out of time, and I do want to talk about the outputs. But also, I will just quickly go through the slides now from disability practitioners. One of the quotes that came up is, we're seen as more advisors rather than knowledge holders, which I felt rang true, that often the expertise of disability practitioners aren't sought out by university management in understanding the student cohort, which I think is a lost opportunity. So on this slide is a photograph of two people engaged in a conversation. Next slide, Jane. Once again, going through these really quickly. Practitioners are caught between the values they hold and the systems they operate. And this was a tension between the social model, or the different models of disability, and the medical model that we work in regards to asking for medical documentation. So the first quote is, we try to be strengths based, but then we ask students to provide all this documentation that is all deficit based. And so we're constantly doing this flip flop. And another quote, we definitely still sit in a medical model with the aspect of our service delivery. However, we conduct our appointments, we very much ask about impact, not about diagnosis. So I guess we try to steer clear of the medical type questions and explore the functional impact of students' needs. Next slide, please, Jane. Documentation is the thing practitioners most struggle to justify. So practitioners understood the burden of documentation experienced from students. And the quotes that I pulled out here is, when it comes to medical documentation, I usually frame that as, I'm not doubting what you're telling me in any way, But in order for us to best support you, we need some information in writing. And people are fine with that. I guess the ones that are not are fine, we probably don't see. And the other quote is, we ask for supporting documentation, but we're quite flexible about what the documentation can be. Students don't need a diagnosis. We make our own decision on adjustments. Next slide. Sorry, I'm going through these so quick. Academics are the biggest obstacle practitioners face, they felt. And once again, not wanting to pile on academics. But practitioners described having the expertise, having done the work, and having an agreed plan, but then watch it be ignored with no consequences. So the quotes I chose is ADHD, for example. Some unit coordinators get really annoyed with that and they say, oh, well, if they know they struggle with time, why don't they just start a week earlier? Another quote, academic staff will say they are supportive of students with disability, but then complain about resourcing to implement the adjustments. And then the next slide, Jane. There were other themes that came out that I just didn't have time for. There was a tension of advocacy around the role of practitioners in advocating for students. And the boundaries that needed to happen because of the institution they're working with. There was a lot of information around professional recognition, like practitioners come from a varied background, such as social work, education, health, but the roles lack a shared professional identity. Many feel their expertise is not recognised by their institution. And as I think at this time of the year, many practitioners are feeling the workload and under resourcing with high student numbers, under resourced teams, and high staff turnover. It's not new to anybody. Okay, the next slide. So we kind of, with all this information, have kind of come up with a diagram, which is on the screen now, which is a circular diagram showing three interconnected segments, representing the three levels which the fellowship outputs are aimed. Service, which is benchmarking, institutional values and levers of change, and individual professionalisation. In what I'm providing today is probably more focused on the benchmarking and the professionalisation. The values and levers for change will be added to the report. Next slide. So, um, one of the ideas is coming up with what I'm calling at this stage, and this could all change in the report once we get everything down on writing, but a disability services toolkit. And on this slide is a photograph, goodness, of two people sitting in a room engaged in a conversation or a counselling session. The toolkit I'm looking at dividing into components. The first one is the numbers game. The second is a service standards or good practice guide. The third is service benchmarking. The fourth is moderation and student voice. And the fifth is student voice. I'm going to just showcase or talk about three at this stage. More will be in the report. The numbers game. We haven't quite landed on how or what this will look like. But what we kind of, in the research, we found that number game isn't that important as like something like benchmarking, but the people still really value it. We in the sector have a informal spreadsheet that we use to kind of identify how many practitioners there are, student numbers, etc. So I wanted to see if we can formalize that in some way. Kylie was going to put in the chat an example of what ACSES has done with their interactive tool. The challenge with this tool is it is public information. So the information we want isn't necessarily public knowledge. So you can see, well, when you actually access that interactive tool, there's participation and performance data. And recently added has been a student experience data. And hopefully ADCET will have access, present on that data tool soon because it's really wonderful to see. So I don't know if this will come off or how we can do it, but it's something that we really kind of would love some way that we as a sector can understand the numbers game across the sector. And I just want to thank Gemma from ACSES for her support and guidance with this piece of work. The other piece of work is service benchmarking. We were really fortunate in our research to come across the Australian Council of Open and Digital Education, a code, and they are a peak Australasian organisation for tertiary institutions engaged or interested in technology enhanced learning and teaching. And once again, Kylie's putting the link into the chat. We will send all these links out with the recording as well, so you'll have them. A code have developed benchmarking, and they've um, about their teaching and learning practice. There's currently 9 access areas in their benchmarking, and they're doing their 10th one this year, which is around accessibility. And a code were very generous in allowing me to observe how they were working on developing those benchmarks. And Professor Stephen Marshall, who's been pivotal in that work, who is the Director of Centre of Academic Development at Victoria University in Wellington, facilitated a workshop for disability services managers to start the process of designing our own sector benchmarks. So that will be one of the recommendations, that that work continues and that we look at developing benchmark for the sector. And then the last one I want to talk about was moderation. One of the things that came out clearly was there is inconsistency around what some people call learning access plans. There is research that's currently underway around how many names there are for access plans. That kind of in some ways can cause a challenge too. So one of the ideas that was sparked through those conversations is that we don't actually, some universities moderate their access plans internally, but there's no process around that. And also there's not a lot of moderation that happens across the sector to ensure quality assurance in the adjustments that are consistent, fair, and equitable. So we researched a number of what different tools that are being used in moderation, and I wanted to provide an example for the sector, which once again Kylie will put in to the National Consistent Collection of Data. They have a number of resources there in how schools are to impute disability and the moderation tools. So that's something again that hopefully comes out as one of the outputs. Okay, next slide, please. And I've only got 3 minutes to go and 2 slides. I can do this. I can get there. All right, once again, apologies for rushing. Okay, professional standards and professionalisation. On this slide is a photograph of counselling session showing a woman sitting cross-legged on a couch holding a glass of water, talking to a professional seated opposite to her with a clipboard. So professional standards framework for disability practitioners is being developed through this research project. We have drafted from survey insights on the skills and attributes practitioners consider the most important. We've redefined that in consultation with practitioners, managers and students, and we'll look at having some consultation workshops in the future. And we also hope to develop a professional development framework that'll sit alongside the standards. Naively, at the beginning of this, I thought we'd come out with these all done and dusted, and we'd also have a grad cert certificate in disability practitioners ready to go. But I've learned that things move very slowly. But these are one of the things that will be in the recommendation of how do we professionalise the sector. So, yep, watch out. There's more to come. Next slide. Okay, the next slide is the photograph of 2 women engaged in a conversation. So the next steps are progressing the development of practitioners' professional standards through testing workshops. We're consulting out on and finalising the professional development framework. We're looking at benchmarking, developing and consulting and testing, and I'm really excited that Stephen from ACODE or from University of Wellington has agreed to come along on that journey with us and support us as a sector. And the final report is due at the end of April 2026. So that will have all the findings, all the information and all the recommendations for what to do in the future. Next slide, Jane. Thank you. Now, my contacts are on the screen. It's darlene.mclennan@utas.edu.au. I have made it to the 10 minutes for question mark. I feel like I rushed those quotes a little bit. I do apologise because they were so powerful. They were powerful to me and I hope they were powerful to you. But now any questions? So you can stop sharing, Jane, and I'll get over to the questions.
Absolutely.
Thank
Thank
you,
you,
everybody.
Darlene. And thank you, everybody. Some great conversation going on in the chat there. Just quickly, while people collect their thoughts, there's some questions coming in there, Darlene. I might just quickly ask: was there anything that stood out that surprised you going into this, given your background and everything else? And as you said, you thought there'd be certain things that would happen. Is there anything that stood out that you went, "I wasn't expecting that"?
I think the student interviews, I did talk to a lot of people that had really negative experiences, and I hope that I'm one of the biggest advocates for disability practitioners and the work they do. And so it was quite difficult. And what I reflected is probably the people that have had a good time didn't need to talk about it. It's probably the people that had, a negative experience really needed to vent. And, they were like, I pretty much remember every interview, and I would leave my chair exhausted and feeling like, oh my gosh. But yeah, so I reflected on that. I did surprise, but I reflected, like I did hear some good stories as well, but I think overwhelmingly it was a negative. But they're probably the ones that wanted to share their story and want to improve things for other students.
Thank
Yep.
you.
And then I also, the thing that surprised me is I couldn't get everything done in 12 months, even if I had a break. So
We all
hats
underestimate
off
our
to
ability.
researchers. You do a lot of work.
Absolutely, well said. Look, Yvonne's put in a question here. Is there a coalition of, or coalition of what assessment tools are currently being used in the development of adjustment plans in higher education institutions?
No, there isn't not that I understand there's a coalition, but it's something that we're wanting to work on. So we will kind of look at forming up working parties for each of those if this is what the sect like, working parties to do these things going forward. Naively, I thought I'd have it all done in the 12 months and haven't. So, yeah, and also I haven't wanted to probably push the sector in the last month because, this is probably the busiest time for universities at this stage. So, wanting to wait for things to quiet down a little bit in universities before I kind of call for volunteers. Look, the managers, and I don't know if I thank them enough in that, probably not enough, but the managers have, they've filled in surveys. We've had a couple of meetings. They've been absolutely amazing in this whole process. And I don't want to overburden with them with work, but some of them are doing this work already. Like there's some, little pockets of, well, there's lots of pockets of great practice. It's just trying to kind of vet consistency because it was quite like one student said that one semester they met with one disability practitioner in the university, and then the next semester they met with somebody else, and it was a total different experience. And that was kind of when my alarm bells went, oh, so even internally, universities aren't using that moderation process to make sure there's consistency. So yeah, I think that's important to do.
Absolutely. Look, Elizabeth asks, do you see ways that student and practitioner voices can keep being heard and contributing to how this develops further? Could it form part of a continual improvement feedback plan?
Yeah. So one of the things I put in those 5 things I didn't talk about because we haven't quite finished firming up those ideas was the student voice. So at the moment, some universities do survey students quite regularly. And so there may be capacity to develop something that can then be adapted by each institution. That's kind of a consistent data collection of students' experience. There's some other talk that's happening with government around the student support policy and other work. So yeah, watch this space. I think, that is, and I probably didn't say that enough in my presentation that the student voice really is the most important thing. And yeah, and so that I certainly want to make sure that's threaded through. Yeah.
Absolutely. Look, Emily's also asking, and I think this is a great question, what kind of skills and knowledge are you currently looking at recommending and including those into those professional standards?
I should have read that before I came on here because I probably won't do it justice. Sorry. But yeah, like there's things like, the legislative framework that's being used. Yeah, look, I probably because I haven't developed that piece myself, I really worry that I won't do EB justice in how it's been developed. But things I know because I've been doing the grad cert proposal, like the idea of actually developing a grad cert for professionals to undertake, and those things are the legislative framework about trauma-informed practice that's around that adjustments, the consistency in adjustments and moderation of plans. There's a certain skill set that we've all practitioners have and have developed. They've come with it and then developed within their team. Like I spoke to a couple of universities that they love the diversity within their team. That's made what the team works. So you've got somebody who's a teacher, that they've got an OT, they've got somebody with, who's deaf with lived experience. There's a whole range of people within their team that makes for a really good practice, and that they regularly meet and talk about those, the diversity within their team and how that benefits in relation to students. And we don't want to lose that either in this. We don't want a cookie cutter of you must all do the grad cert and you will be a perfect practitioner. But we also want to reflect that a diverse team is also a good thing to have as well. I don't know if I answered that. Sorry, Darren.
That's
We
fine.
need we need a 10-minute break before the questions
Yeah,
because I'm hot
we
and
do. I'll
sweaty
just
and
do one more quick question, given time that's there. And Claire's asked, do you see a pathway for moving away from the medical documentary requirements that often act as that barrier that you pointed out, particularly for specific learning disabilities, where often SLDs have higher documentary requirements than other conditions?
yeah, look, it's one of the big questions I think faced by the sector. Um, they're trying to unpack the reasons why, because the legislation doesn't require us to ask for documentation. The government just asks that with the funding that the university identifies the student has a disability. When talking with practitioners, the diagnosis, not the diagnosis, is actually the functional impact. That's the biggest and most needed thing to actually help understand the student's need. And I must know for my diagnoses, I have a great document that I can now share with my workplaces or if I go back to study and try to do an undergrad. It actually clearly identifies the adjustments that will assist me. So that is a really powerful document to me. It's not the diagnosis, like I've got a 100-page thing around my diagnosis, but this plan that my psychologist. But yeah, that cost me $3,000. Not many people can afford that. So it's how we do that, and maybe that's something that can actually happen through a grad cert, that we can actually become qualified in actually doing those assessments and adjustments, functional impact. Yeah, it's still one of those vexed. I kind of don't like the wicked problems we have as a sector. I don't necessarily like the word wicked, but it's one of those vexed questions we've had as a sector, and I would really love to keep the conversation going. And I think as we professionalize the sector and we get more networking opportunities to happen, these are the really rich conversations we can have as a sector to, to kind of face those challenges head on and work out some solutions.
And I think just like today, more of those opportunities to have those rich conversations, given it's a wide and vast sector with lots of different needs in different pockets. One last question, because I did already answer kind of Sally Kiff's question that Sally put in there around what surprised you, but just a little bit more, I suppose, about the ACODE benchmarking, which is an accessibility standard that they're coming up for in universities to self-measure their accessibility for their technology enhanced learning at their institution. So I think that's getting launched at a summit very soon at Melbourne
Yep.
University, if I'm
Yep,
correct.
it
Yep.
is. Yeah, so it's exciting. So they have 9 other benchmarks that they've kind of worked towards as well. So in previous years, so it was just timely that when we started looking at this, that they were doing the accessibility one. So that was exciting that we could jump on that. I encourage you all to have a look at the work they've done. It kind of these are probably the things I've learned. I didn't really understand benchmarking. I think I really did think it was the numbers game, that was going to help. We were going to be able to have a conversation that I'm a university with, you know, 20,000 students with disability and I've only got 2 practitioners. I need more because, a similar university to me is this. So it kind of helped me really understand what true benchmarking is and how we, and I think it's really important that we set that as a sector. Otherwise, I think, it probably could be externally set. I think there's a lot of knowledgeable people that understands what good looks like. And I have, like, when I've had those conversations with middle managers and PVCs and DVCs and VCs, they have asked, well, tell me what's good. I don't know if we're
Mm.
doing a good job. So these, I hope that we can create that to say, well, yeah, we're on par. We've benchmarked ourselves as a sector and we're doing good. And
Yeah,
then also have that other stuff around the numbers and the students and so forth. So,
exactly.
yeah,
The more data and the more cross-institutional references we've got, and it
yeah,
is really exciting that there is finally, a benchmarking standard, and it's a bit more of, should I say, as a maturity model. It's to go back and reflect on in 12 months and in 2 years. So self-measuring, how much student voice have we got there? Where is it in leadership? What are we doing? Whole range of different categories where you can look at how are we actually performing from your own internal aspects. Who are we consulting? Do we have accessible ICT procurement? Are we looking at a whole range of different things that ADCET's certainly been working on? So stay tuned for that one. I am going to wrap it. We are at time.
Great.
Thank you so much. Can everybody please join me in thanking Darlene
Thank you,
for this
everybody.
fantastic work, and we look forward to the final outputs of this and the ongoing outputs from this, because I think there's a massive amount of work still to do in this sector for that. But thank you very much, Darlene.
Thank you, everybody.
An email will be sent out to everybody for when the recording of this webinar is available. So for some of those slides we had to quickly get through, you will have access to those. Apologies to the few people we didn't get a chance to answer your questions today. We will have a look at them, and if Darlene's up for it, we can answer and put those with the recording. We'd also ask you to complete a short survey on this webinar and sign up for the ADCET newsletter if you are not already subscribed, and links to those have been added into the chat box. And just a reminder that registrations are now open for the ADCET's UDL Symposium from the 24th to the 26th of June in wonderful Tasmania. And so we look forward to seeing people there. And also ADCET's annual Accessibility in Action Awards are now accepting nominations. More details for that are there in chat as well. So if you know of some good practice, and Darlene pointed some of that out today that's going on across the sector, we'd love to hear about it and we'd love to celebrate it. But thank you, everybody, for your time today. Thank you again, Darlene. Thank you to our captioner, Sharon, and thank you to the ADCET team. Go well and enjoy the rest of your day, everybody.